Hey everyone, so we are going to get started on our colorful night sky that we are going to be painting for our first ever virtual sip and paint or paint night. So if you notice, I actually have a piece of paper that I'm going to be painting on. I have a paper towel, some paint brushes, and then I have the paint that I'm going to be using, and I'll explain this in a little bit. So one of the things I want to talk to you about first is about what type of canvas you're using. So canvas meaning, like, are you using a paper plate or are you using recycled materials? What exactly are you using? So for the purpose of this demonstration, I am using a piece of paper. And if you notice, I have it taped down. So I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. The other thing many of you might be using is an actual canvas. So here I have a canvas, and I want to point out something to you. So the thickness of your canvas, so what I'm looking at here, I want you to realize that when you're painting, it looks much more professional, and I know that that might not be what you're going for, but it looks clean and finished if when you're painting towards the edges, you actually wrap that paint around this edge and paint all the way to this back edge. So something to think about if you're using a canvas. Okay, so I promised I was going to talk to you about why I have this taped down. So one of the things that you need to realize is that as you start painting, it's going to start to curl the paper, especially if you're just using like regular paper. So one of the easiest things to do is to actually tape it down. So if you notice, I'm using painter's tape. And what I like to do is I like to take my painter's tape and I like to touch it to my clothes and then pull it off. And the reason I like doing that is because you get little like felty bits so that it's not going to rip your paper. And then I'm going to try to put even distance around, and then tape that down just like that. So I'm going to make sure I'm all back on camera and that we're ready to go. Okay, so supplies are important before we get started with this. Paper towel is a definite. You're going to need some type of surface to wipe off your paintbrush in case you have too much water. Also, you'll need a water cup. This is an old cup that I have. It's a cup that I've used before. I wouldn't use your favorite cup because it might kind of get a little messy. Then paint brushes. So I have a few different sizes here and I wanted to talk to you about them. The bigger the paintbrush, the faster you paint. If you're trying to get this thing done, use your biggest paintbrush. If you're taking a little bit longer and you want to just enjoy the process, smaller paintbrushes are okay. For the purpose of this painting, you need one larger paintbrush. I recommend having kind of a rounder paintbrush and then a small detail paintbrush. You really only need 3 of them. Okay, and then before we get started, I'm going to move on to our paint. So in the directions, I told you guys that we would need to have, you'd need to have 5 colors. So blue, yellow, red, black, and white. So we're doing a nighttime sky. We're going to be using a lot of blue and a lot of black. I also have 2 different piles of white here. I'm going to use one pile of white to stay as true white. I'm going to leave the other pile of white so that I can use my paintbrush and kind of scoop it out and mix it with other colors. Notice that I put the paint around the edges of my paper plate. I didn't put it directly in the middle because when I pull paint, and pulling paint means like I literally like pull it out of the pile and into the center, I want to have room to be able to mix colors. Having a second paper plate nearby or a piece of paper or something to be able to mix colors on can also be helpful. Okay, so let's get started with this painting. So when we're doing this, the first thing that we're going to start out with, and I'm going to start out with my big paintbrush so that it's easier for you guys to just, I'll paint quickly with a bigger paintbrush. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to dip into my blue. If you want to, you can get your paintbrush a little bit wet, but you really don't need to. So, and you can use water to thin out your paint colors if they're too thick for you. So what I'm doing now is I'm loading up my paintbrush, I'm pulling out of that paint pile, and I'm flipping that paintbrush over. When you're using a paintbrush, you never want to get paint all the way up into the ferrule of the paintbrush. You want to keep it down on the actual bristles. So the first thing I'm going to start out by doing is drawing the ground line or the horizon line. So when you're doing this, I want you to think about the rule of thirds. So the rule of thirds means that your picture plane is divided up into thirds. And the most important details are put on that actual third line. So what that means is, since this is a colorful nighttime sky, we want to have 2/3 of that picture be the actual sky and 1/3 of it be the ground. So I'm just going to draw a line. And this is not going to be seen at the very end, so I don't have to have a ton of paint on my paintbrush. I just need to draw a line. The next thing I'm going to do is, using that same color, is I'm going to draw where my road's going to go. So one of the things to really make this look like a realistic picture is you need to use the illusion of depth, D-E-P-T-H. So the illusion of depth is the illusion that your picture is three-dimensional, that it goes deep down and far away. And the way you do that is by realizing that as things get farther away from you, they get much smaller. They get less colorful and less detailed. As they get closer to you, they get bigger and more colorful and more detailed. So when we're doing the road in this nighttime sky, we want to make sure that it's smaller, so it looks kind of like a triangle as it gets farther away, and bigger as it gets closer up. If you don't like the angle, you can just kind of paint over it. The wonderful thing about paint is that when you're doing it, once it dries, you can paint over it. Like, super simple. We're not going to worry about the trees yet, and we're actually going to go ahead and start painting our nighttime sky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to load up a mixture of blue and just a touch of black. So blue and just a touch of black here, pulling them in that pile. And then I'm just going to start going all the way across. And again, I'm going to, as you start to run out of paint, just pull it from that pile. And again, if you don't like the color that it's making, then wait for it to dry a little bit, take a break, go have a drink, go, have a snack, let it dry, pet your animals. I'm painting close to my edges, making sure that I get everything I want. And as it gets closer in, I'm going to start using less and less black in my mixture and more of that just straight blue. So I'm not going to go too crazy painting that middle, because that's where we really have that nice colorful section. Right now I have a lot of variation, and I'm not sure if it's showing up super well right now in the video, but I have a lot of variation in my color, and I like that personally. I can actually just come and take some straight blue and mix it right onto here and bring some more of that into my overall picture, but personally I'm happy with that. Okay, make sure I paint all the way down to my horizon line. So in the actual example that we looked at when you guys were voting on what you wanted to paint, and I'm not going to finish painting this yet, so don't worry. It had a totally black base. If you want to have it be completely black, totally fine. Personally, I'm never a fan of anything being 100% black, because I think that causes your eye to only look in that spot. So I'm just going to bring mostly black and a little bit of that blue. And I'm going to use the thickness of the paintbrush. And if you want to change out paintbrushes now, maybe go for something a little bit smaller, something you have a little bit more control over. The flat paintbrushes are really good for straight lines like this. So I'm going to just add a touch of water to my paintbrush to get it going. And I'm going to pull this. With a smaller paintbrush, you have to worry more about paint lines, but you have a lot more control over it. When I was in like all of my art classes in college, one of the things we were always told was use the biggest paintbrush you can possibly handle. I think they wanted us to get done faster, but that is definitely something to think about if you're crunched for time. Okay, so I've now painted that base color, and basically what we're doing is, if you were one of my kids right now, one of my students, I'd like to use the term of outline and fill in, because you get a really nice crisp edge when you outline something. So literally you outline where you're going to go, outline where it's going, and then you fill in. It causes you to actually have to go back over an area that you've already painted and get that nice crisp line that you're working with and that you really want to get. And again, go back when you're painting, and you're pulling the paint, make sure that you're covering up all of those white spaces, because no one wants to just see like the spot where you accidentally forgot to put paint. So, and the really cool thing is, again, if you make a mistake, you can just paint over it. If you don't want it to be a flat line, you want it to have like a more mountainous look to it, paint some mountains in the background. It's cool. If you want to show the difference in that line, we can do it with highlights later on, but you can also just take some of that blue, make it lighter around the edges, just like that. Just having some fun with it. Make it your own. The thing about these paintings is that they don't have to look like everybody else's. I'm going to give you tips and techniques on how to make this painting, but you can add different things. If you want to add a car into it, if you want to add, you know, whatever else in here, if you want to add a big giant moon in the background, it's your painting. It's your choice to do what you want to. Okay, and then the last thing, while I've still got all this black here, is I'm going to start to paint in this area. So this has more blue again, just like the sky, than it has black. So again, I'm going to outline what I've already painted, just like this, using the thickness of the paintbrush to make that outline. And this particular paintbrush has an angle to it. Yours doesn't have to. This one I had at home because I was doing some home renovations and I wanted to have an angled paintbrush to have an easier access to painting on the wall. I had to do some touch-ups. But yours does not have to have that. And now what I did was I took a little bit of black towards the base because it's going to be farther away from that colorful night sky up here. And I just want to bring some of that black. I want to blend it or mix it in. So I'm starting to have like a smooth transition from one color to the next. Okay, so this is kind of our first step. This is where we're going to get to and then kind of take a break. We need this to dry before we can start adding the next things. If you want to add some lightness to this while you're waiting, you can start to mix some white into it, but you don't have to add all of it. So again, there's going to be one pile of white that you keep as your pure white and one pile of white that you keep as your mixing color. Personally, I think I'm actually going to keep this one as my mixing color because it's already getting really close to my black over here, and I'll keep this one as my pure white. So this will be like for highlights and stuff. So using that pure white, I want to get some highlights mixed in towards this bottom, and I'm going to mix in some of this white, and I'll paint this over later on. This nighttime sky just kind of mixes in. And the really cool thing about paint is that while it's wet, you actually have like a lot of play with it. You can even add a touch of water to make paint go further. If you're struggling with like the viscosity of your paint, so the thickness of it, if it's way too thick, maybe you have like a full bodied paint and you've not worked with that before, and it can be kind of challenging. So if you just add a little water to your paintbrush, it can help you kind of move things around and help get those smoother transitions. Also, if you're not liking how brush strokey something's looking, transition to your bigger paintbrush. So I'm going to wipe it off on the side, and it doesn't have to be totally clean for this. Yeah, look, that's not a clean paintbrush. But I want to touch more water. I can use it to kind of mix in and get some of those paintbrush, those lines, and take it off of my painting, and I can pull it all the way across. And if I don't like that it came all the way across like this, I can literally come back into my original paint mixture, just that black and blue, and just pull it back in and paint that back in. And so literally what you're doing right now is you're building up the layers so that we can put those lighter colors on top. I'll eventually put more white in this once this is dry, but you're doing this thing called blending. So if you're making like an ombre effect, you're doing a smooth transition from one color to the next. Okay, so I think I'm just about happy with that. And this can be a point where we can take a break. So go ahead and get yourself a snack, enjoy, broom stack a little bit, and I'll see you in a couple minutes. All right, I look forward to hearing your questions and seeing your comments. Talk to you in a second.